Hello, my name is Nikki Harle. I'm one of the International Recruitment Managers at EDHEC Business School, Global MBA, and I am delighted to be joined by Aude Theobald, Director of Recruitment and Admissions, and Nancy Bompaka, Admissions Manager. Today, we're going to let you know just how we go about selecting the very best candidates for our MBA programs. But of course, this information is going to be useful for any candidate applying to any top-ranked business school, and both for an MBA and an Executive MBA program. So please use the chat function in the bottom right of your screen to ask any questions, and we will get onto them at the end. And do let us know there if you're interested in an Executive MBA or a full-time MBA program. Aude, can you please tell us about your role in the selection process?
Thank you, Nikki, and welcome to our webinar. We are very happy to be here with you today. So thank you for your question, Nikki. As for my role, I'm the Director of Recruitment and Admission for both programs, the Global MBA program and the Executive MBA program. And I sit in the different committees as of the head of recruitment for both programs. I do represent the recruitment teams, and with the program directors, Nancy, the admissions manager, we come together to make sure the best candidates are in the MBA classroom on the first day of term.
Thank you. And Nancy, what about you?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nikki. So I am the admission managers for MBA programs at EDHEC. I am kind of an intermediary between the recruitment team and the selection committee. So I review all applications that we receive and that are due to be presented. I check if candidates meet our admissions requirements. I see if there are any elements missing. I usually connect with recruitment managers to get more insight into the candidate's profile and anticipate any questions the selection committee might have. I participate in the decision-making, as Aude mentioned, and finally, I communicate the decisions and possible recommendations to the candidates. What about you, Nikki?
Okay, so I'm usually the first point of contact for candidates, wherever that might be, at a fair or through email or through LinkedIn. So candidates reach out to me even before they're ready to start their application. So I guess my colleagues and I in recruitment are technically gatekeepers and advisors, and candidates first have to go through us before actually applying.
I see. Maybe we can follow the candidate journey to see what happens, as a candidate progresses through the various stages of admissions.
Sure. So normally candidates, they take an interest in the program, they decide if they want to apply, and then they reach out to the recruitment team, either to start asking questions or perhaps ask for a profile evaluation. And that first interaction with the prospective candidates really gives us a good idea of the type of person we're dealing with. I mean, we're not judging the candidate's application file, of course, but we do often get some insight into their personality through the tone of their email, whether they're professional, friendly, dynamic, or on the contrary, rather demanding. So this first contact is actually quite important, as it does give us quite a good impression. And we do remember this as the candidate moves through the admission steps.
Nikki, I have a question for you that might be interesting to know for candidates attending this webinar. When a candidate asks for a profile evaluation, how do you go about it? Because I know you get so many CVs for both MBA and Executive MBA program each week. So I don't suppose you have time to spend as much time as we do in the selection committee. So how do you do?
It's true. And Aude, I actually read in online that in a job interview, when a candidate applies, the recruiter spends just a few seconds glancing through the CV, not reading it line by line. And we do it in a very similar way. So for us, we want key information to be very clear and really jump out. So a clear, well laid out CV, 1-2 pages absolute maximum, really is important.
So this CV is really your first impression of the candidate. And what do you look for in particular for this first evaluation?
I like to see clear sections. I like to see the job titles, the names of companies, and a sentence or two just to describe that company if it's one that I don't know. I like to see a clear educational and professional experience section in reverse chronological order. I'm looking for clear career progression, maybe a section on international exposure, volunteering experience. So basically, I'm looking for somebody who has evolved, somebody who has potential. Top name companies, they're always reassuring because we know that the candidate has been through a very rigorous selection procedure in order to have been recruited. And we know that competition was probably tough and they had what it took to be chosen. I don't know, maybe Aude, have you got something to add to that?
Not that much, I would say, because first of all, before we begin the selection committees all together, we do our homework, and homework means looking at CV, and it's the same as you're looking at the career progression, international exposure, academics as well, name of companies, size of the companies. And it's always interesting as well to look at the personal interest of the candidate. They give you a bit of an idea of what the profile of the candidate is. And in addition, we look at voluntary experiences, gaps in CV as well. We look at that, and we look as well as how long the candidate has been staying in the position for. It gives as well an extra indication on the profile of the candidate.
Okay. And so, Nancy, for each element of an application file, you give them a grade. Yeah. So, what are the things that carry extra points?
That's a tough question because there's not just one thing, but I would say intellectual curiosity, for example, certificates or other sign of continuous learning. That's always interesting to see, as there is, a will of self-improvement, in the candidates. So that's great. Cultural awareness, that can be linked to international exposure. You were talking about it earlier. Giving back to the community, I think, through volunteering, for example, or any other things that would make the candidate stand out, really.
Okay. And is there something you don't like to see in a CV?
Maybe lack of structure. You talked about 1 or 2 pages. So or statements that don't get backed up further on in the admissions process, like, I'm a great communicator, but then, the referees, they might say that this is something that can be improved. So this type of things.
Aude?
Well, actually, an uncountable gaps, because we always going to imagine the worst if there's no explanation on the gaps in CVs. Yes.
Personally, I don't like to see a long CV. I've written 5-6 pages.
I do agree. Yes.
That are very technical as well. So there's just too much information that's really not very relevant. Nancy, you're also very involved in the academic experience section of a candidate. So you get the first information from the CV, but then after they apply, you actually have to check everything, the reputation and the ranking of the university, look at the transcripts of grades in detail. Can you tell us then how you evaluate the academic section and what sort of academics really stand out?
Sure. So I usually look at the GPA. I look if there are any honorable mentions, look at the ranking of the university in the home country. And usually, candidates with high GPAs, preferably from a reputable institution, they do tend to stand out more.
Okay. And does that have the same importance for an application, both for the executive MBA and to the full-time MBA?
So what I just described would be true for the global MBA. For the executive MBA, the approach is a bit different. The average age of the class is around 40, so the focus tends to be more on professional experience that definitely has more weight than the academics.
And so, Aude, what about the professional experience section on a CV? I mean, I suppose leading company names are a plus, but what if somebody has only worked with smaller companies?
Well, as you mentioned, it is indeed a plus, but it's not only about the company name or the size of the company. It's not what is most important. What is important is the responsibility and the scope of the responsibilities the candidate is having, and usually the smaller the company is, the greater the responsibilities are, because there's few people trying to have an impact in the way the company is running. So, you might work for a big company, a big name, and have a small responsibilities, and work for small companies with bigger responsibilities. So it's about the responsibilities and the scope of the work the candidate is doing, more than the size of this company. Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of brings us on to the topic of family business, because we sometimes see in admissions that the candidate doesn't want to even write that it is a family business. They feel that that might be considered negatively, that they've been offered a job too easily, so they don't like to put it. But is it a strength, family business, or is it a weakness in a CV?
Well, if you ask my opinion, my personal opinion, I would say it's usually strength, because when you work in a family business, there are so many issues. There are issues because you need to have recognition. You need to fight for your recognition internally with the employee working with. You need to find your place, not only in the family business, but as well in your family. And usually your place in the family is the same as in your company. So it might be very difficult. And, it's for a reason that at the Global MBA, for example, we do tackle this issue of working for family business, because there's not only professional experience, there is as well the personal impact that working for family business has on you. Yes, so it's usually strengths, I would say.
I find also that that these candidates have often been in the middle of a family business from a very young age, and they tend to be a bit more mature than some of the other candidates, having been involved in dining table discussions with the families and uncles. So I would agree, definitely a strength in my point of view. Nancy, what about you? And if you have an entrepreneur and you don't know anything about the company, how can you evaluate that?
Well, one word: research. I try to find as much information as I can on the company, the type of industry, activities, internet presence, whether they have a website with more information, with a presentation. Try to look at the number of employees, whether it's small size or a larger one, the type of responsibilities and achievements, of the candidate within that company. I also would like to highlight that, EDHEC Business School was founded by entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurship is definitely something we value as much as corporate experience.
Okay. And what about volunteering or charity work? I tend to find also when we first look at a CV, the more mature candidates, the more experienced ones feel that it's not necessary to add things such as volunteering or extracurricular activities. What do you think about that?
Well, giving back, I talked about it earlier, is one of our core values. Candidates do not just get an MBA for themselves, in my opinion, but because they also want to contribute, within their community at a higher, more impactful level. So if this value is already present in the candidate experience, then, all the better.
So good to have that section somehow.
Sure.
Okay. Aude, you mentioned earlier gaps on a CV. I mean, that's something that, you can't change if for whatever period you were not in employment. How can you handle it?
We lost Aude.
We've lost Aude. Maybe in the meantime, as she gets back her connection, maybe you could take that question. Sorry for the spontaneous question, Nancy, but what do you feel about somebody who has a gap on their CV? How best to handle that?
Well, I would say very candidly that, that it happens. That's life. And, there's really nothing to be ashamed of. But it's important to be open about it, to be transparent, and so to share details. Because, of course, I mentioned the selection committee might have questions. It would be the type of questions that would come up. Why is there a gap in the CV? And, it's always interesting to know why, to know more about the history.
Okay. And that reminds me of something that I wanted to bring up. I often find candidates on their CV, they just say that they started a position in 2015 and they finished in 2017, next job, and they don't put the months. So for me, it's very important that they actually put the months that they started the job, ended the job, also months and years for when they started their education and stopped their education, because we have to have a 4-year bachelor as a minimum requirement. So for me, the actual months and start date and end date is important. I hope Aude can get back into the webinar. I think she must have been cut off somehow, but let's carry on. Let's maybe move to the next.
Hold on, I think I can let her back in.
Is she? Let's try and get her in.
Yeah, I think she's going to join us in a few minutes.
Okay. Nancy, can I just go into the next question for you then? A question perhaps, the section on international exposure. Why is that a section that candidates should have on their CV? Why is it important?
Well, Nikki, there's no secret that we live in a world more and more diverse. So, our MBA, I think we're pretty lucky to have, a fair representation of that diversity, through gender, through nationalities, languages, age, work, or life experience. So it is important to see that apart from their skills, candidates also have that level of awareness.
So in that international exposure section, we would see examples of what? Examples of people having...
That could be, international exposure through their work, through their activities, but also through their personal time. Can be, travels, holidays, anything really, that ties them to the international.
Things like dual nationality is also, I guess, quite important. The fact that the candidate has been exposed to different cultures. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. And if we want to be a bit more general, is there anything that you could advise candidates to put on their CV, or any tips on CV writing in general or format that you can share? For example, somebody who's had a very technical role, how best to write a CV there?
So I would say keeping it clear and simple, 2 pages maximum, as you mentioned earlier, with highlights, on the positions, on the dates, with the months preferably, with, the companies, responsibilities, and, maybe a few achievements, in order for us that are not from the field to clearly understand, the career path over the years.
Okay. I think we spent quite a lot of time talking about CVs, but just because that does give us a lot of information on the candidate in a quick and easy way. But of course, it's just one element in the application file. So we can maybe talk about some of the other documents that we receive and how we evaluate them, some of the assignments that we ask our candidates to do. And welcome back in, Aude. Great.
Thank you. I've been disconnected suddenly. Did I miss any questions?
Yeah, no, well, Nancy took over. She spontaneously answered some of the questions that I was going to address to you, but we were more or less finished talking about CVs. Okay. I was just saying that just because they give us so much information that we do like to spend quite a lot of time on them, but it's just one element within that application file. And I was going to maybe ask Nancy if you could go through the list of application documents that we require at EDHEC. I guess it's quite similar to other schools, but what's in the application pack?
Sure. So when candidates start the application online, they have to fill in information, but also upload documents such as, the CV, a copy of their degree, their transcripts. We ask for 2 letters of recommendation that can be submitted later on, but they have to be from professional referees. Then we ask for language tests, so an English test, an aptitude test, and their passport.
Okay, aptitude test. You mean GMAT, GRE?
Yes, GMAT, GRE, executive assessment, TAJMAJ.
Okay. We'll talk about them. Anyway, we talked about the academics already, but that's something a candidate can't change because his past is already graduated, right? But what would happen if they have a low GPA or they aren't satisfied with their previous academic performance? I mean, is there anything that they can do to improve that?
Sure. And actually, during the committee, we're going to look into the GPA as mentioned. And sometimes if we feel that, the candidate is lacking quantitative background or this kind of maybe English language sufficiency, we would recommend that they do some online courses in the subject they feel they were weak, or we feel they could improve or prepare themselves before the MBA program starts. And, today we can find online courses on Coursera, or even at the community college, they can take courses and classes.
That's a good way to boost a weaker
yes.
academics. Sure.
Exactly.
Okay. So maybe that then takes us back to these aptitude tests, the GMAT, the GRE, the EA. Nancy, does the selection committee have a preference?
Not really, because, these tests tend to test the same skills. And well, maybe that's a question, for you. When, new candidates ask you about these tests, what do you advise? Do you advise a test in particular? Because they're all different. So maybe you can explain, the difference and which test might be better suited to which type of profile.
Sure. So typically we see the GMAT. GMAT, that tends to be more suited for somebody who's come from a scientific background. They maybe enjoyed maths. They're maybe good at logical reasoning. That's a computer adaptive test, meaning every time they get the question right, the next question becomes harder, but it carries more points. So that can be a little bit stressful for somebody, for example, who studied a humanities degree. They might be more suited to taking the GRE. You've studied journalism or history, for example. They might have really good verbal skills, really rich vocabulary. And so I would tend to recommend that they do the GRE rather than the GMAT. And then we've got the executive assessment, which again is offered by GMAC. So the same people who offer the GMAT tests. This is better or well suited for professionals, maybe about 7 years of professional experience. They've got less time to study. It's certainly not considered an easier test, but I think it's easier psychologically for these professionals. And then, of course, we've got the TAJMAJ, which is kind of like GMAT for native French speakers. But as you say, they all test the same things. So knowing that somebody who has studied a scientific course has a more quantitative mind, Aude, how do you go about using the aptitude score when you're evaluating the whole application file?
Well, as we have been mentioning in the beginning and during this webinar, we do look at the candidate on a holistic view. It means the GMAT or the aptitude score is one element of the whole application file. And we look at it, we say if it's a quant personality, of course this person is going to perform well in GMAT, but it doesn't mean that someone with a less quantitative background is not going to perform and be accepted by the selection committee. So we do weight those criteria holistically, I would say. So don't be ashamed of having, maybe a less quantitative background. And, we do look at it on the really holistic view. Yes.
Okay. And then the other test that most schools require would be an English test for the non-native speakers. And so Nancy, would a very high score on IELTS or TOEFL impress the selection committee?
Rather than impress, I would say it is always reassuring, but the most important thing is how it translates in terms of communication rather than perfect grammar.
Okay, so we'd rather have somebody in the class who's communicative and happy to share ideas and messages rather than a perfect grammarian. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. Let's take a look at the reference letters then, because you mentioned those. Most schools would ask for 2 reference letters. So what is the selection committee actually looking for when evaluating these, Aude?
Well, first of all, the referee must be people or, the candidate has been working with or for, and not a friend or professor. To begin with an email address, which is a professional email address. And then in the reference letter, of course, we would like to see referee mentioning the work and the candidate has been doing, and as well how they perform within their job description and within the task that has been given to them, and the scope of their responsibilities. That was very important to mention. And of course, good reference letter are preferred, of course, welcome. more than the one who are, less advantageous, for sure.
So,
But maybe Nancy can talk about them as well, I would say.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add a bit to what you said. So, references definitely have to come, from someone that they know in the professional world, preferably from a direct supervisor, someone, that the candidate currently refers to, or, even, a former supervisor. References need to have, detailed information and examples. They are the best kind, of references.
Exactly.
On the other hand, references coming from a distant colleague or from an acquaintance, from a family member, or someone who has no first-hand experience with a candidate, they will not be scored highly.
Yeah.
and Nancy, what about a reference coming from a professor?
Well, academic, references are important for, other programs, in our business school. But for the MBA, as the focus tends to be more on the future, on the professional experience, and how the MBA can impact the professional world, it makes more sense to have someone coming from the professional world only, rather than a professor.
Okay, and it could be quite a long time ago as well, so perhaps not so relevant now.
No,
Right.
for sure.
What about if we talk about the video interview? Because a lot of schools are now integrating a video interview as part of their selection process. And at EDHEC, together with the CV, it's probably one of the most important elements of the application file. So, Nancy, could you maybe explain what that is and at least what it involves at EDHEC?
Sure. So when candidates complete their application online, they then receive an invitation to continue with their online interview. So we use a platform called Kira Talent, and the focus is on professional experience. So on that platform, they will have 5 video questions, and each question has a specific topic. So there is motivation, there is leadership, problem solving, there is teamwork. And for each question, candidates have 45 seconds to prepare, and then 2 minutes of answer time. On that same platform, they also have 2 essays, and something I would like to highlight is it's kind of a spontaneous interview, so candidates don't know the questions beforehand. So that's the element of surprise, I would say, in that type of interview.
What's actually being tested there? Is it the content of the answer, or is it the way they present the answer and deliver their message?
Actually, both. So we get to learn more, on the candidates. So that would be for the content part. We know about their strengths, their challenges, some experiences they have to live through. But we also see how the candidates, will share an idea or answer in class, or how they might perform in a job interview.
It actually sounds like some of the job interview questions you would get, because
Yes, it does.
We tend to be really practical in the program, so something you can really apply in real life.
Okay. And Aude, what would make a candidate get a high score in the video questions?
Gosh, I would say it's my favorite part in the selection committee, actually. I love the videos so much because, you have been looking at 5 candidates, 5 CVs, reference letters, academics. And then when you look and discover the Kira interview questions, it's like you're seeing for the first time the candidate, and you see the candidate move, behave, answer the questions. So although we acknowledge that it's very stressful exercise, it's so much important for you to succeed in these Kira interviews, because we're going to look at your authenticity as well. We're going to look at how you behave in front of a camera, and we will probably see that you're stressed out as well, and we will try to moderate our grading system depending on how stressed you are. But I think what we will be looking at is that the capabilities of the candidate to express his motivation for EDHEC, his ability to share his experience and to learn from it. Because not only the candidate is going to be questioned about his experience, but as well what he learned from this experience, good or bad, actually. And although the CV gives us an indication, the Kira confirms it, I would say. And it's like meeting the candidate for the second time around with a more personal approach. And it's a deep dive. It's understanding who this candidate is, and if we could raise to his expectation as well. And it's understanding as well if we can help the student open the next chapter of this professional experience. And I think it's such a nice thing. Yeah.
And Nancy, anything to add to that?
No, I tend to agree, with what I just said. It's like, you discover a new side, because in admissions, I'm very much focused on, on paper, on the documents, on, the theory I know of the students. And when you look at the Kira, it's just seeing them, under, a different light, in action. So it's much more, interesting. It's, in addition to what you already know.
And Nikki, do you have any tips when the candidate has completed their application? Because I know you keep in touch with the applicants throughout the process. So I guess the Kira question comes into the conversation.
Yes. So when the candidate applies and we've given them a first evaluation, I tend to call them to give them some tips specifically on how to answer Kira. And I tell them to take their CV and think of maybe 5 or 6 specific stories that they can remember in their career that tell an interesting story. They've maybe come out as the hero or learned a lesson from it. And then I advise them to practice telling the story by heart, and each time put a different twist to the story that can then be adapted to answer a different question in a slightly different way. So in telling the same story, which by then they know really well, they can just add a sentence like, and so I had to overcome a challenging obstacle, and so I had to work to a tight deadline, etc. And it works quite well. And in this way, there's no wasted time in them trying to remember a specific incident. And I also tell them to write the word star on a post-it and stick it right next to the camera, as this should help to keep their answer well structured. And it also helps with direct eye contact. I tell them, the reason I tell them to write star is because this helps them to structure the answer. This is the classic structure to an interview question. S, situation, T, task, A, action, R, results. And if they can, answer their 2-minute answer using that structure, it keeps them on track. And I tell them not to write notes and absolutely do not read, because I know that the selection committee really penalizes that heavily.
I have a question for Aude, maybe. So we were talking about the Kira, the star format. So someone, that can happen, that someone gets a low score at Kira. So what does that mean? What have they done, for example?
Well, sometimes they've misread the question. They didn't read the question carefully and they just don't answer the question at all. Either they don't give any example, because actually they talk about the situation like, on a very generic level without talking about their proper experience with a proper example. Or else they're completely, they read the question, they gave an example, but it's completely out of hand. They don't structure the answer. And so we get lost into so many details that we can't understand actually the answer. So I would say that would be the reason why we give low score. And sometimes as well, people tend to be very stressed out, so they don't articulate their thought properly. So unfortunately, it's going to penalize them as well. So repeating and listening to the tips that Nikki gave could help them. Absolutely. Definitely, I would say.
And in the Kira, there's also essays. At least at EDHEC, we ask them to write 2 essays. They don't know the questions in advance, so the question will pop up and then they have 20 minutes to actually write their essays. So what would make a good one?
Is the question for me?
Yes,
I can answer. Absolutely. I would say, well, like we said from the beginning, we look at the candidate on a holistic point of view. And the idea is to understand if we are going to be a good match together, the candidate with us and us with the candidate. So authenticity is key. And I know we are in the ChatGPT era. So doing online interviews, it's easy to copy the question in ChatGPT and to answer it. But dear candidates, be ready. We can flag it. And we know how to flag it. So please don't do that because it's not going to help you. And what we're going to look at is answer, and it's sharing your own experience, trying to answer the question the more accurate way possible. And as well, sometimes, I've been reading essays which really moved me because you can tell that the candidate was really, authentic, was really sharing his own experience. And I would say we need, when we're finished reading this essay, to remember you and to say, oh, I remember this candidate is the one who has this experience, is the one who mentioned that way of, dealing with this particular problem. So really trying to stand out, being honest with us, and telling us a nice story, I would say.
And then finally, there's the face-to-face interview. That was the platform interview. And EDHEC, I think, offers this in a lot less stressful way than the video question because it's almost a two-way discussion. And we actually do this with one of our alumni who serve as interviewers. So, Aude, what's that all about?
Well, to be honest, we love our alumni and we do trust our alumni to help us choose the best candidate for the school because we, are sitting in the selection committees, but actually our alumni have done the program and we are not lucky enough to have done it. So although we know it inside out. So I think to have this interview with an alumni is key for both the alumni and the candidate. The alumni is going to think about, would I like to be an alumni alongside this candidate? Would I see myself in an alumni reunion with this candidate? And the candidate will say, well, am I impressed by this alumni? Am I impressed by, what this alumni did in his career after his MBA program? So I think it's very interesting for both parties to discuss. And it can be an honest, and it must be an honest discussion. And actually, it's as well a great opportunity for the candidate to ask all the questions he might have in mind without, thinking, well, I'm talking to the selection committee, so it's going to impact my, my application. But no, the alumni is going to be very open to share his own experience and to give you tips as well. The alumni is the only one actually who can give you tips on how to succeed inside the program and what to look for, how to behave, what to think about, how to prepare. So I think it's a precious time that they are both sharing.
Nancy, is there anything to add to that, maybe with regards to the Executive MBA, for example?
For the Executive MBAs, the process is a bit different. So we do have an online application. We do also have the Kira interview, but it is used a bit differently. So the focus is more on where the candidate comes from and where we can take him and kind of see an evolution, in terms of career development. And for the final step of the process, instead of the alumni interview, it's actually an interview with the director of the program. Since, cohorts are smaller for the Executive MBA, we tend to have 30 candidates in average. That means that in terms of application, that also match, that trend. So it is easier to arrange this type of meeting with the director directly. But in terms of purpose, I think that is similar, than for the global MBA. Kind of understand the candidate's motivation, see if they are a right fit, if we are a right fit, for them, and answer any of the questions.
Well, thank you both for your insight into the selection process. It's true that the information we all shared is perhaps based on the selection process at EDHEC Business School, but I think all programs will probably have a similarly rigorous selection process. And I think it's also important to remind candidates that if they feel they've been offered a seat too easily in a program, then it might ring alarm bells. They might want to consider why they've been accepted into the program without too much due diligence. And I think it's also true that some programs pay more attention to specific areas of an application file, such as GMAT or GPA, because that can help with rankings, for example. But if we look at EDHEC selection process in particular, I think, as you said, Aude, we've got a very holistic overview of the candidate. We've got the hard facts from the transcripts and the GMAT. We've got the career evolution and the potential that we see through the CV. We've got the reference letters and the overall fit for the classroom atmosphere through the alumni interview and feedback. We're coming to the end. So, Aude, is there a way that you can sum up the way that the EDHEC selection committee comes to their final decision on an application file?
Well, yes, I would say that the candidate is choosing, as I've said already before, is choosing his school as much as the school is choosing the candidate. So it's a two-way process. And I think it's very important to have that in mind. We are in addition looking to create a cohort spirit with high diversity, and we need candidates who will actively contribute to the learning environment of the classroom. So, of course, we're looking for candidates who are positive, willing to both share and learn from their cohort as well, and share with their cohort, and who we feel are going to be great ambassadors for EDHEC on the long run. And I would say at the end of the day, it's a match, and more than an academic match, it's a value match. I mean, the values that we will be sharing during the program and the values that EDHEC is about should match the value of the candidate. And whatever program you're applying to, please do look into the consideration, the values of the school, because they need to match yours, as well as what kind of cohort size you would like to be with or to be in, what should be the profile of your classmate. And I think looking at all these questions, you would probably be very happy to choose the school you're going to be choosing. So I don't know if I should have said that, but I'm saying it.
No, I think it's a great way to summarise who the selection committee is actually looking for as well. And it's certainly been a very interesting discussion today. So thank you both very much for your valuable insight. Nancy, I'm not sure if there are any questions that have come in. Could you maybe take a look at that and see if there's any questions?
Sure.
I think there was some.
Yes, I see that someone mentioned. So there is a question from Hari Chandana. So would you advise certification courses and GMAT scores to be included in the resume? Do you want to take that, Nikki?
Oh, I would say if you've got certification, anything additional to show that you've taken the initiative to improve your level of learning, certainly add that in the CV, yes.
Okay. There's another question. Is there any age limit for this MBA? Maybe Aude?
Well, first of all, I would say no, but it depends what you would like to achieve during an MBA. It's about your post-MBA goals. And, we tend to be an MBA who welcome diversity. So we have a class with candidates from 25 to 45. So I would say that the age limit is about what you would like to carry out after your MBA, because it's an in-presence MBA. So you have to leave your country. You have to dedicate yourself to your program. It's a 10-month program, which is short. So there's no age limit as per se, I would say. It's all about what you're looking for.
We have a question from Akib. So who or where should I reach out if I'm interested in the full-time MBA? I am from India. So maybe I can take this question. So Akib, you're more than welcome to contact us on our email address. So there is, that's mba.admissions@edhec.edu. So I'm going to write it down into chat. And then you will be contacted by one of our recruitment managers for a more personalized approach.
I'm going to say a question that we often get, and I'd like either, maybe Aude can take this one, but candidates often say, but I've not had any managerial experience, so is my application considered weak?
Well, no, not at all, because in fact, we do have this pressure of becoming or being a manager, but you might not have been a direct manager, but you might have had, you might have run large projects, or you might have, indirectly managed, employees or diverse backgrounds. So there's no such a thing as direct management. You can, be a project manager and have run different projects with different countries, with people from different backgrounds. So no, even if you don't have any managerial experience, doesn't mean that you cannot benefit from an MBA. Absolutely not. Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask another question that we often get, because candidates often say to us, but I don't speak French. So is it going to be a weakness in my application if I apply to EDHEC?
Well, to be completely honest, it might become one. Yeah. It depends on your objective. Should you wish to stay in France, I mean, it's, learning French it's a must. You can, take some classes before you come to the MBA. And of course, you're going to be able to attend language classes during your program. And even on a personal level, to know how to buy a baguette or how to get a coffee is always interesting. And, it's part of the French culture as well, or any culture. When you're traveling, if you speak the language, you feel more at ease, you're more integrated, and you can understand the culture better. So I say, if you don't speak French, try to learn it. It's a nice language anyway, if I may.
Nancy, are there any other questions in the chat? Because if not, I've got one final question for you.
There's a question about financial assistance, and maybe can be tied to a question we often get. How does the selection committee decide who gets scholarship? So I'm going to answer that one. There's no specific application, for scholarships at EDHEC. They go from 20 to 40%. And if you fall into one of our categories, so we really promote diversity. So it can be, we have scholarship for women, we have scholarship for entrepreneurs, we have scholarship, for cultural diversity, we have scholarship for excellence. So if you fall into one of those categories, then you are eligible for a scholarship.
Okay.
And I think we have another question. I've not taken GMAT score, but I'm planning to do so soon. And in case I'm selected for an interview, then should I go ahead with GMAT? Well, I would recommend that you go ahead with GMAT because it can give you access to what Nancy just mentioned, the excellent scholarship, which is dedicated to the one who are taking aptitude test. And actually, it's going to be a plus in your application because, as we mentioned, we're different criteria when we are looking at, complete application, and one of them is the aptitude test. So if you take an aptitude test, you can get an admission score higher and then more chances to be selected and, to be accepted into the program. So in any case, I would recommend that you take the GMAT, especially if it's planned for you.
Okay. Well, the question I was going to ask Nancy has already been answered. So I think we're going to end here. We're also running out of time. But of course, if anyone has any other questions or would like further information on anything that was said today, you can, of course, contact me on mba.admissions@edhec.edu, and we will be pleased to advise. So I'm going to say thank you to Aude, thank you to Nancy, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you found it a useful webinar, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.